Hello and welcome, members. Okay, today I'm going to take you through a final table of an $8.80 pot limit Omaha high-low game, which I played a couple of weeks ago, and give you a bit of an insight into some of my thinking. You'll notice here that I've got a different replayer going, and we've got some stats available. So that should help to understand things as we go along a bit too. Now, just to explain the stats, I'm only showing some very simple stats here so that we don't clutter the screen too much. Each player has their stats below them, except for the two players at the top who have their stats above them. My stats are the session stats, so it took 159 hands to get to the final table. And we won't play out the entire final table because it took nearly 2 hours. So we'll just look at some of the more interesting hands. And just yeah, part of the reason for keeping the stats simple, you can see here, this guy's on the button, but the button's obscured by the stats, and I want to try and keep the table as clear as possible. Just to explain what these limited stats are, first one, VPIP, voluntarily put into pot, pre-flop raise, 3-bet, pre-flop, continuation bet, so after raising, continuation on the flop. This is a simple fold to steal. I usually use more complex ones than that, depending on which blind they fold and from where the steal comes from. Fold to continuation bet. It's an important stat to know whether or not you should continuation bet when you raise and they call. And the last stat there is cold call. That's just how often they flat call a raise pre-flop. In red here is the number of hands. I'm not sure if you can see that, but yeah, it's the number of hands that I have on that particular player or had on that particular player at that time. Anyway, so let's get right into it. I'll just run through the first hand so we can see what's happening. A couple of folds, and I'm going to fold that trashy hand. You notice that a lot of evenly, there's not a really big difference between the bigger stack and the middle-sized stacks on one of the mid stacks. So someone bets into a whole table. You can be pretty sure that's not a bluff when they're betting into that many players. Everybody else folds. Okay, well, we've got the hang of it with this new table. Let's move right along. And here we are on the very next hand. Let's see what happens. Couple of folds around to me. And I open with a standard 2 times raise. Anytime I've got like the second best starting low, suited ace, and also a pair, I'm going to be getting right into that. Okay, so we've got a shove over the top from the short stack who's got just a few blinds in a stack. There's no way I'm folding here. There's really no need to look up any equities because I'm not going to have the odds to fold those. Oh well, our opponent had a really strong hand, but unlucky for him, we took half the pot down. Anyway, let's move right along. Okay, we're nearly one orbit later and an important hand is about to go down. I'm going to fold this trash from under the gun. So we have a limp from early position. Stoop mixes it up a bit. He limps a lot of hands from early position that he would sometimes raise, or sometimes limps from early position hands he would often raise is probably the best way of putting it. Okay, so we've got a short stack all in there. Stoop, well, he gets out of the way. Okay. So Pakahuti comes out, bets. Wow, bets pot, even though there's an almost empty side pot. Let's see what happens. Gets the fold he was looking for. And there we have it, he wins. Now, the interesting thing here, apart from the fact that the short stack just got knocked out and we just moved up a position, it's interesting to see what Pakahuti is prepared to play, especially against a limp. Now, he won't do this all the time. He's got the big stack and he's going to ram home his advantage. Ace, ace, 10, 10, it's not too bad, especially with one of the aces suited. Of course, he's got no low possibility. Yeah, I probably wouldn't do the same thing at ace, ace, 9, 9 so often, or ace, ace, 8, 8, because you really, when you're going to play two big pair, you really want them to be connected to give you some straight chances as well. Anyway, yeah, we're one player down, let's move right along. And it's the very next hand, and this one's interesting. Okay, so we have a raise, call. Now, what should I do here? Now, I'll tell you what my thinking is. Based on the other players here, I rate myself as having as good a chance as just about anyone except for Pakahuti at this stage of winning the tournament. And my hands, yeah, sure, I've got an ace deuce in there, but my hand's not particularly strong. So I'm not really keen to play a multi-way pot out of position pre-flop when I've only got about 20 blinds in my stack. I think I can find a better use for my stack, so I'm going to fold here. Had my big kicker, the 10, been a lot bigger, like a queen or a king, and had my six been a lot, a five or smaller, I'd be more inclined to want to mix it up. But really, playing big pots out of position is a recipe for disaster. Also, if my ace was suited or if my hand was double suited, those are the sort of things that I think about before I decide, am I going to play what looks like it's going to be a big pot? Because remember, if I call here, the pot gets even bigger. It's already 13,600 in the pot. And yeah, if I call into it, it's going to get a lot bigger. So I decide to make the fold. Look, I wouldn't criticize anyone for making the call there. It really depends on the situation. Um, for example, if I was up against a lot of players who I judge to be very clever players that I find difficult to play against, say I'm at a high buy-in final table and I'm not finding the going easy, then I might even be tempted to three bet, put my stack in, and cross fingers and hope for the best, because you're not going to be a million miles behind. But anyway, I'll just quickly play it out just to see if we can see the other players' cards. Oh no, we don't get to see the other players' cards. And yes, I would have flopped trips and would have snap called, but that's not the point. I probably shouldn't have played how the hand went. Anyway, the important thing was I decided not to play a big pot out of position in a multi-way pot, because I think I can find spots with better value in this particular tournament. Okay, let's move on. Okay, here we are a little while later. I haven't had a chance to do much, but okay, so it folds to me, and I'm going to open raise. Final tables, you can't sit around waiting for premium ace-deuce hands. You've got to play pots. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. Call out of the small blind. It's not the best thing when the small blind calls you, because they're usually got to be pretty strong to be playing out of position from the small blind. Big blind calls. Okay, he has value with a wide range there. All right, so let's see. It checks to me. Now, I'm not going to continuation bet here. This board is just way too connected. Of course, someone might have already flopped a straight. And either one of those players in the blinds can just be waiting. It's just waiting for the check raise. As you can see with my stats so far, I've got a continuation bet of 100%. That's 4 out of 4. During this tournament, I actually can't remember how many of them happened at the final table. Not too many, but yeah, it's when you continuation bet a lot, you've got to be wary of the check raises. People will sit and wait for you. So I check behind. Okay, and I pull up a terrible card on the turn, so I'm pretty much going to give this pot up to anything. Oh, well, they check around again. My situation hasn't gotten any better. There's nothing I can beat. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to fold. There's nothing I can beat. I can't even beat most bluffs here. Let's see, and don't usually show the outcome, but as I said, pre-flop, the big blind there, he had the odds to call with a fairly wide range. Interesting to see what the small blind was prepared to call with. That's a little bit on the weakest side, on the low side of the pot, to be calling and playing a raise pot out of position. So that's interesting to note. I guess he has got a VP IP of 35%. So yeah. Anyway, save some dollars there by not continuation betting. I really, really doubt I was going to force this player out of the pot. And this guy with top pair, who knows, he might have decided to come along with top pair and a gut shot. So best decision made there. Anyway, let's move right along. Okay, it's just a couple of hands later, and I've pulled up a premium hand from under the gun. So I'm going to bring this in for a raise. I've come in with a big raise this time. As you've seen before, I raise anything from a min raise to pot. I pretty much randomize it, not usually in relation to the strength of my hand. So anyway, on this occasion, I've gone pot. See what happens. I've been called a lot, so I'm hoping for a call, and unfortunately, I didn't get a call. Oh well, it can't happen every time. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, so it's just a few hands later, and I've got the sort of hand I really like to be playing from late position. 2, 3, 4, 5. Has a lot of equity. It also gets you paid off really well on ace high flops where you've got the nut low and a straight draw, and you can get it all in on the board, and often charge, make a lot of money out of players who are weak on the low side and were playing their high only hand. Anyway, so we've got a raise from under the gun and a 3-bet, so it doesn't look like I'm going to get a chance. There's no way I'm playing this hand now. Let's see what happens. Okay, yep, at that stack size, he wasn't probably going to be doing much else from under the gun. So we've got 2 players all in. We'll just play it out because it'll be interesting to see what hands they went with. Okay, that is interesting. So what I will typically do is I'll make a note on this player about what he was prepared to commit with pre-flop at a certain stack size at a final table when 8-handed. But it wasn't such a bad hand. It's not a great hand. He possibly could have looked for a better spot. He had a reasonable stack, but anyway, he's out of the tournament. So we've moved up another position. Let's move right along. Okay, here's an interesting hand. Let's see. So we've got a limp. I get out of the way with that trash. Now, a big raise over the top. Usually designed to take the pot down there and then. Let's see what happens. My gold chip, I think is how you pronounce his name. It's an interesting call for that amount out of position. Myself, in this spot, I tend to be a raise or a fold kind of guy. If my hand was really good enough to play against a strong raise like that out of position, then it was probably good enough to come over the top. Of course, he would be committing himself and it would be all or nothing. But anyway, he goes in and he puts, he's getting close to a third of his stack in there, certainly more than a quarter. Let's see what happens here. And he just comes straight out and donks. And Joey up there folds. Now, this is an interesting hand for a couple of reasons. And as a result, I made a note on this player down here about how he played that hand. A little too passively for my liking. And Joey up here. What do we think he had? Well, either he was like semi-bluffing with some big double-paired hand. He doesn't seem to have an ace-deuce in his hand. Maybe he does. It would be an unusual fold. Usually it's an indication that he's got a big pair of aces, but with some weakness in his low kickers, and he probably doesn't have the suited ace of clubs. Otherwise, he probably would have snap called. So I made a note on each of those players about how they played that hand. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, very next hand, and I've pulled up a fantastic hand. Just come in with the min raise. And it folds around to me again. So that's 2 raises in a row now that I've had and haven't gotten any action on. So I'm going to bear that in mind with the next raising hand I get, or raising opportunity that I get, I should say. Anyway, let's move along. All right, here we are, just a short time later. Let's see how this goes. Got a pretty good hand for the big blind. Now, my gold top limps into me. I'll often, because I'm going to have position throughout the hand, I've got a premium hand, well, fairly good one. I'm usually going to raise here. But my stats told me, I believe, that this guy never raises out, open raises out of the small blind. See if I can find those stats for you. Pre-flop. Oh, I can't immediately pull up the stat. I was hoping it won't let me move the stats into the viewable area. So let's see. We got from a small blind. No, sorry, I can't pull up the stat, but take it from me, this guy never open raises from the small blind. So he tends to, and he has folded into me on the last few orbits. So I'm thinking he could be stronger than usual. And I want to mask the strength of my hand and just play my position. So on this occasion, I elect not to raise. It's a 50-50. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And checks. Now I think he could have hit that flop. So I check behind. Oh well, I got the nuts. I bet a large bet, betting the pot. But when a pot's small, I tend to bet bigger because people seem to be more inclined to come along in a small pot for a large bet than they are in a large pot for a large bet. So there's a chance of making more money off his flush draw or anything more full house draw, but he just folds. Oh well, you can't make a ton of money out of every hand. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, here I am on the button. Boy, have I got a good hand. So let's see what happens. Get the limp, fold. I raise big. I'm hoping he's going to call and play the pot out of position. By the way, I certainly don't need aces to be raising like this. If I sense a player who's going to call out of position, I'm gonna raise big fairly liberally here. Certainly any ace big wheel deuce combination, you know, like ace queen 4-2, that sort of thing. Especially if my ace is suited. I'm really going to try and build a big pot when I'm in position. So let's see. And he doesn't make the call. That's unfortunate. Now, it's been a long time at this table since any of my raises got called. So it's about time I started opening up. Yeah, so it's really unfortunate. I haven't had any of these raises called, and I've been varying the size of the raises. So anyway, let's move along, see if we can get some better action going. Okay, here we are a little while later. So, the really tight player finally finds a raising hand under the gun. Obviously, I'm going to get out of the way with this trash. Let's see what happens. And a 3-bet from Mars. Pahakuti. Look, I'm sorry, dude. I'm really getting your name really wrong. I'll give up, and I'll just call you Pa, and we'll know who we're talking about. Now, I would expect Bailey here to 3-bet, given that he's such a tight player and he's coming from under the gun, and he doesn't. He just calls. This is bizarre. Getting half of your stack in pre-flop, nearly half your stack in before the flop, is just, it's kind of crazy. Commit to it. Go all the way. I mean, if your hand was good enough to play for this percentage of your stack, then play for the pot. And anyway, I mean, I just can't imagine many pots he's going to fold post flop. About the only thing I can think is he's got position and he might be trying to play a stop and go against somebody else who has raised, which is a pretty strange thing to do. Or someone who's 3-bet, sorry. Not an impossible play. Okay. He's all in for his whole stack if he calls here anyway, and he does make the call. Let's see what he had. This is going to be fascinating. Wow. That was bizarre. He's turned trips and he takes the pot down, but like, what on earth was he thinking? So I immediately wrote a note on this player. He was clearly committed all the way. He had no low draw. He only flopped a pair of 8s. And he's got darn lucky. There was nothing that he was beating there on the flop when he called in except for a pure bluff. And even then, a lot of bluffs had a lot of outs against him. So that was just strange play. I made a note on him. Anyway, I showed that one to you because it would give us a bit more of an idea about Bailey here as we're moving forward. Anyway, let's move right along. Okay, so I finally I picked up another good hand. So I'm bringing him for raise. I'm keeping the raises smaller now because I've had bad luck at not getting any of these raises called. Oh, finally got a player to call. Great. He checks to me, and I go ahead and c-bet because really this is the sort of board that typically hasn't helped a player who's called out of the blinds in a raised pot. Generally, they're going to want a low board or a low draw board. A player like this, he doesn't cold call. Look, he's only got a 12% cold call. Admittedly, this was not a cold call because he was in the small blind. But, you know, he doesn't call a lot of raises. So he's probably played something fairly fairly strong, at least an ace deuce. And so he's probably not going to like that board at all. The only time I'd be in a lot of trouble if he'd called with a hand like ace, queen, jack, deuce. And of course, then he'd let me know straight away, probably by 3-betting. Not always, but and he just folds. So yeah, always looking for those boards for continuation betting, particularly where your opponent probably doesn't like them. Anyway, let's move it along. Okay, here we go. This will be the last hand of part 1, and then part 2 will be available to members only. So anyway, Stoops in pretty bad shape there, 5 or 6 blinds. Takes the opportunity to play a pot heads up. Let's see what he's chosen to do it with. Okay, pair of jacks with 4 deuce kicker. That's a fairly reasonable hand. When you're desperate and short stacked and you can get the hand played heads up, that's a pretty good option to go with. Turns out it hasn't worked on this occasion. In fact, those who are members of Team 08, associate members or higher, will have seen an analysis of a very similar hand, a double-suited Jack-Jack 5-3, where a player with 15 blinds played it in a 3-way pot committing himself pre-flop. Some people in the discussion thought that, hey, that was crazy, but once we broke it down and analysed the equities of the hand, it turns out it was a profitable play. So those big pairs, the 2 little kickers, can be a lot stronger than a lot of people think, and I sometimes get called crazy when people see me 3-betting, coming over the top with hands like that, but the numbers don't lie. Anyway, so we haven't gotten too much into equities and that sort of thing. We will in part 2. We'll have a lot more interesting stuff, but that'll be in the members only section on the team08.com website. Anyway, until next time, bye for now.